You're up.
All right, well, welcome everyone to our Resource YYC Lunch and Learn. So that you're all aware, Resource YYC is a co-working community geared to professionals. We offer our Lunch and Learn sessions as a means for our community to network and provide meaningful learning opportunities. We also provide private office spaces, dedicated desks, day drop-ins, and virtual office options. If you're not yet a member with us, we encourage you to check out our website and follow us on social media. Links will be posted. Today we have Dana Colliard, who is the owner of Ripple Dynamics, a company focused on exploring the power of perception. And he's hosting this workshop that will help you challenge your existing preconceptions of stress and how it will impact your thinking and behavior in order to make stress your ally. Over to you.
Awesome. Great introduction. Thank you very much. So just to, I guess, reaffirm what my focus is for the webinar, and basically it is for my business as well, is helping people see stress, anxiety, and performance and the impact on their performance in positive ways, in a positive way, Anka. So it's really a perception shift on how we see things, and it's learning to think in new ways and ask different questions. And it really sounds counterintuitive. How can stress be my ally? But we'll see shortly that we need stress and anxiety in our lives. We can't be, if we didn't have any stress and we didn't have any anxiety, we'd be kind of like a puppet on a floor with the strings laying around us and not much happening. So we need that stress and anxiety to get us to take action on our goals, to react to things that may not agree with us. But a lot of times we allow that to become overloading. And so that's the focus now, is how do I take that stress, get it back into the optimal zone, and use it as an ally? So I'm going to start sharing my screen right now. And get through this process. There. Can you see me? Awesome, good. I like to talk with my hands. So we need to look at over the process of the next 30 to 40 minutes in terms of what are our old habits and what new habits would we like to develop in terms of looking at stress. And as I've worked with clients over the last 3 to 4 months with this program, I'm finding a lot of people who say, I never thought that I could think about positive stress in a positive way. Quite often the overwhelming view of stress is such a negative thing that it has a negative impact on our lives. And that's how we've learned to respond to stress over time. But I stress that's a learned response. And so there are ways to unlearn that. But before we go down that road, I want you to just take a minute and we're going to look at what is the benefit of stress. So quite often we look at the negative impact on it, but stress really has a lot of benefits. These are just 5. So when we begin to feel a little stress, for example, if we are in a situation where we're kind of languishing, or we're bored, or we're not too sure what to do, if a project comes along, or if an issue comes along, our stress level and anxiety level will rise to provide us with the energy to deal with that. And so our cognitive function really locks in and says, okay, we have something to work with. And as we become more and more engaged with it, our cognitive function becomes much more clear. And we'll talk about that as we go through the show, of how our cognitive function becomes clearer and then it starts to fade. Stress and anxiety motivate you to succeed. Just to give you a very small instance of that, when you go out to your car, one of the first things you'll generally do, either before you leave your driveway or parking lot, or partway down the road, is you will check to see if your phone is there and to check to see if your wallet is there. That's a normal reaction, but that's anxiety at a small level working to make sure we have the things we need as we're moving forward. Stress can also improve our memory. And the reason is, once we're fully engaged in what we're doing, we tend to remember the skills and the information that we need for that moment and during that project. And so our memory will focus on those things. Once we're done that particular project, we may let those things go from memory over a period of time. But during that time that we need it, stress has said, focus on this, remember this. The other thing that I really like about stress is it really helps us get into our optimal stress zone, is what I call it, or our sweet spot. So quite often when I'm in a project or I'm working with a client that's in a project and I'm talking to them, they say that time flies by, they're engaged, they don't think about anything else, they're just zeroed in on that project, and they're feeling good about using their strengths. And that's stress and anxiety helping us use our optimal cognitive and emotional skills at the same time. And the last thing is that anxiety and stress will help us build resilience. As we learn to deal with blocking information out that we don't need and letting information in that we do need, we become more resilient and develop that skill to keep ourselves from being overwhelmed by what we have. So here's a quote that I'll let you read. David Bohm was a physicist in the early part of the 20th century. He was a physicist working on atomic energy. And this really sums up that we need to learn to look at things differently, and we need to perceive things differently in order for us to realize that there's other ways of looking at the world. And that really applies to our communication with every single person that we deal with. When we realize that their way of looking at the world is different than ours, we have a goal to understand their way a little bit better and vice versa. So what I'd like you to do right now is write down these 3 questions on a piece of paper if you have it handy, and leave a little bit of space. And what I'm going to do is provide you with an opportunity to email me these questions and responses, and then I will follow up with you if you do, just to ask you some questions, make some comments, and try to keep the momentum that you started, keep it going forward. I'll give you 30 seconds to write down those questions. Okay. I'm going to tell you a story. And the story starts back in 1908. And I use stories a lot in what I do. I believe they're probably one of the most fundamental ways that we can pass information along and help others understand it. So this story starts in 1908 by 2 researchers called Robert Yerkes and John Dodson. And they were working with mice, and what they wanted to do to see is if they could habituate mice to make a certain response. And in this particular case, their little maze was when the mice came in this door, they would either want the mice to go in the black room or the white room. Now, naturally, mice would choose the black room, but they wanted to be able to control which room they went into. So on the bottom side, there were small microelectric panels. And when a mouse decided it was going to go into the white door, for example, and they wanted it to go on the black door, they would give it a shock. When the mouse came back out and went back in again, this time the shock might be increased. And each time that it went in, the shock would increase until they got to a point where the mouse would say, no, I'm not. Mice don't say that, but they don't even think it. They just decide to go into the other room. So as this experiment was taking place, what they were looking for was how long does it take a mouse to change its habits based on the intensity of the stress. And here's what they thought. They thought that as they increased the shock to the mice, or the stress, come on, get there, they felt that it would be a linear relationship. The stronger the stress, the quicker the habit. The less the stress, the longer it take to have the habit. And that's what they originally surmised. What happened was this. So they just found that in actual fact, for the mice, as the arousal or the stress increased, their habit formation was strong until it got to a peak. And at this point, when the shocks got too high, the arousal of the mice started to drop off and they started to give up and they made no response and it started to slide down. So this is the first indication of something that was again studied in the 1950s. So approximately 50 years later, they let it drop. And then a psychologist researcher named Hebb went through the papers again. And this is what we call the stress curve. Sometimes it's called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, and sometimes it's just called the performance curve. So if you search any of those on the internet, you'll be overwhelmed with hundreds of pictures, probably thousands of pictures. And here's how it works for us as humans. So we may find ourselves in a position where we are bored or inactive or languishing. We're not sure what to do. And sometimes we don't even know why we're there. But as I said before, something will come along that grabs our attention and our stress and anxiety will say, oh, something's happening here. Let's take a look at it. As we become more engaged in what's going on, our motivation and our engagement in that project begins to increase. And as it increases, we become much more successful in what we're doing. Finally, we get to a point here where we're really fully focused on what the project is about, and time's going by, things are good. But sometimes, and this is the normal view of the curve, is that we reach a peak performance. Just like the mice, we get to a point where we are just barely balancing the information that's coming in and trying to block out the interruptions and the information that we don't need. And here we sit in a point of balance, and they call it peak performance. But from research and not my research, but just in reading and research about high professional athletes, the Olympic people, the Olympic athletes for now, even high performance leaders, we can't operate at the peak performance for very long periods of time. Even elite athletes know that they can reach their peak, but then they have to take a time to rest and rebuild and then build again until they get to a point where they're ready to launch out into their peak. So if we miss this, we fall down what we call the backside of the curve. So as I go through the webinar, I just want you to know this is the backside of the curve. We start to feel fatigue. And if we don't notice what's happening to us, we can run into exhaustion and frustration, eventually chronic stress, panic and anxiety, and eventually people can burn out or break down. I have personal experience. I have personal experience riding on the backside of the curve over the years, and that's what's really driving what I do today, is to be able to share that story and what I've learned over time. One of the things that our brain does is we have the emotional brain and the cognitive brain, which we'll talk about, but they have a filter. And it filters information in and it blocks information that we don't need. As we move up this side of the curve on the front, our mind is filtering in the pieces of information that are really relevant, and they're blocking out pieces of information that are irrelevant so we can stay focused and not even think about those things. When we get up to the peak, as I said before, we reach that balance. We're just letting in almost everything that's relevant, and we're trying to block out everything that's irrelevant. However, once we hit this side, the filters get clogged, they become dysfunctional, and what happens is we start to let information in that's irrelevant. And we start to block out information that we really need. And we visually and literally cannot see that information. It's blocked and it goes right by us, and some of the stuff that we don't need comes right in. So it's a balance of filters here, and we need to recognize when we're tired, when we're exhausted, so that we can stop, take a break, and get ourselves back over to the front side of the curve. So what I've looked at and what I prefer to use is something called the optimal stress zone. And it helps keep us in this area where all of the information that I need to do projects or deal with an issue is coming in. I'm focused, I can handle it, I'm not overwhelmed, and I'm zeroed in using my skills, using my best abilities to accomplish and be successful with what I want. Being in this zone allows us to reserve in energy and filtering capacity that when we need to get up to the peak performance, if a deadline got changed or a new project jumps on board or an issue arises or a surprise arrived, that we have the extra energy to get up to this area and focus and work in this area for short periods of time. The minute we start feeling some of these areas of fatigue, we're exhausted, we're frustrated, we're quick to be negative or say, bark at somebody, we need to take that time and get ourselves back over into the optimal stress zone. And that's where the power really is. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out a way how you can figure out what this looks like for you without going through the peak and then down the other side. So it's recognizing the signs of stress that will get you back over there. I see I have a couple of chat questions. Yes, ANCA stress can be good. Not sure. Sorry, missed the third question. Okay, it'll be at the end. The third question was, what one action can you take? At the end of the webinar, you'll be able to write down one action that you can take to start moving your view from a negative view to a positive view of stress. One of the things that I like to do is put pictures into people's minds, into the subconscious, which is an area that I work in quite often. And the picture that I chose for this is that if we view our stress as a pressure gauge, that means that it's neither no stress or all stress. It means that we can modulate our stress either positively or negatively, either way. And the picture shows a couple of valves. And as we go through, we will see that we have the ability to control those valves. And if you just take a quick minute or 30 seconds and just read the quote on the side, I won't read it to you. Quite often in our lives, we feel like life is out of control. We don't have any control. I'm overwhelmed. I'm maxed. I'm working to the max. I'm crazy busy. That clouds our cognitive mind's ability to remember that we do have control, and that's where we're going with the rest of our presentation. So, perception. I ran across the work of a futurist named Joel Barker back in the 1990s, who did a lot of work with paradigms and organizations, but I researched his concepts and drilled it down to the individual level because organizations are made up of individuals. So the little frog in the diagram, our perception is like a set of blinders, or it's our globe, or if you think of Jim Carrey in his movie when he was inside the globe, we see the world through our lens, and we only get to see our piece of the sky. But each person on this webinar is seeing and hearing me differently than the other person. That's your only piece of the sky. There's 6 key principles that I just want to run through quickly that I want you to understand as we go through. The first one is our perception is unique, totally unique, and you'll see why as we move through it. The key for us is to understand that because I'm unique, so are you, and so are you, and so are you, and we need to be able to communicate in ways that we can get our information through their perception filters. In our world, our little world provides the rules for us to be successful. So imagine being in your comfort zone, and the things you do always are successful for keeping you in that comfort zone. And that's your whole perception working for you. But sometimes we get to a point where we are so concerned, we are so driven that our way of seeing the world is the only way. And what we end up with is perception paralysis. And I have to say, when I was younger, I was guilty as charged. I had a very difficult time thinking that, why didn't other people see this the way I did it? It took a while for me to make that change. So I experienced that perception paralysis. And we have all probably bumped into an individual, whether it's work or your personal life, that just has their own way of seeing things. They're not wrong, they're just different, and we need to understand the difference. So that leads to number 4, the fact that our perceptions can be flexible and they can adapt to the change. So during COVID, all of our perceptions have had to adapt to the change of a new world over the last 2 years. We didn't have a choice, and our perceptions flexed and absorbed new information to say, okay, here's your new comfort zone. Here's how you can be successful moving through with this. And number 5 is related to that, because even though we can experience perception paralysis, we can choose to change our perceptions. We can talk to other people, we can read, we can gain new experiences. We can say, I want to see the world in a different way. And the last one is a little tougher. We can experience perceptual blindness. And this is what I was saying about the people on the curve. There is information coming at us that goes right by us, and we just don't see it. So there's 3 ways information comes in. It comes into our filters and we get it. It's meant to fit. It may come into our filters and get distorted through the filters and go into our mind in a different way. And the last part is we just don't see it. It goes right past us. And I'll give you some examples of that later on. Awesome, Anka. Just got your message. Awesome. So this is perception process, very, very simplified. In our, come on back here. In our brain, we have a small organ here called the reticular activating system, and we have another one here called the amygdala. This little piece of our brain is the unconscious, the subconscious, or the emotional side of our brain. Information coming in hits the first one, gets filtered, hits the emotional one, gets filtered, and what we need gets through to the larger part of our brain, the conscious side. And so this part of our brain is historically, evolutionary, very, very, very old. For man, it's been developing in man as a species for 2 million years. Our conscious mind is only been developing for about 60 to 100,000 years. So 60,000 to 100,000 years. So you can see the difference in strength and the difference in power exists. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute. So using my hand as an example, this is my spine. Sitting on top of my spine is what we call the reptile brain or the reticular activating system. This is the filter for everything we do. It's like a 360-degree globe that surrounds us and picks up all the information. It starts making decisions. Next, it goes to the amygdala, which sits over top of it, still on top of our spine. And these two are evolutionary, very old and very reactive and very powerful. We need them, but not when they overwhelm us. Over the last 60 to 100,000 years, our cortex and the conscious mind has developed over it, but it's still not as strong. So when our emotions start to jiggle underneath, we try to get signals, we're overwhelmed, all of a sudden we pop our top because the emotions are overriding it, saying, I need to react like this. There's where we need to learn how we can work with the emotions. I'll go back to sharing my screen and here. There we go. So the rational versus the emotional brain. My analogy that I use is a horse and rider. The horse is basically the rational part of our body, the rider, and the horse is the emotional part. So you can see the power differential between the rider and the horse. The horse can be very reactionary. It can take us places we don't want to go, but because of its power, it will take us long journeys to get to our goals or get to the end of where we want to go. The rational rider really can't control the horse. And so our rational mind doesn't control our emotional mind. We learn to guide it. And when we think about it in another term, Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, says, people generally think that we are thinking people who feel, but in actual fact, we're feeling people who think. And that really puts perspective of the power of our emotional brain. I'm just taking a course now just finishing it up actually next week, from Tim Box, who's a mind coach in England and has a program for working with the emotional brain, the subconscious brain. And his analogy is, we look at it like a ship. All of our emotions are all of the crew members that are in the ship, but the ship really only has one captain, and that one captain is the rational mind. So it's his job to monitor the emotions and guide them to be doing different responses than what we would want them to do. So here's an example of perception in action. Have a little fun with this one. It is extremely simplified. There are two sentences there. Try to make out which is which. I double dog dare you. So this is an example of information that's coming to our brain unfiltered. Here's one way of looking at it in a partial filter. So I just changed the colors so that one sentence is in red, one is in green. But you'll still experience some difficulty as you speed read to the side by confusing and going right into green from a red sentence. Another way to filter it is I just put a red square over it. What this red square is, it tends to give more information, and so we can understand and read the sentence of last night I played a blank CD, etc. But in the background, this other information is still sitting there and it's still calling my attention. Anything that is changed in my surroundings begins to call my attention. If we don't take the uncertainty away from it, then the incompletion principle kicks in and we're always aware of it. Good filters, when we're not stressed and when we're in our optimal zone, do this. They automatically pull those information into pieces that are relevant that we can read. Here's another example. Here's an example of how our habits that we've developed so far can get in the way of trying to read. So in this particular case, I want you to go down the list as fast as you can, and to yourself, say the color, not the word. Any struggles? I see a few smiles. That's good. There's the impact of habit. We've developed habits of doing things, and now we would need to reteach our brain to, when it sees the word yellow but wants to say the word green, we would have to teach it that particular micro habit over and over and over again until we got it so that we would automatically say green, yellow, red, black, all the way down. Here's another example. What do you see in the background?
A cheetah.
Yeah. Cheetah is awesome. Yeah. So this is an example of, we have a foreground of information and we have a background of information. And so it's very difficult for us to see the cheetah in the background because of the confusing patterns that are there. Our filters, when working clearly, would help us pick up on the cheetah faster. So a couple of researchers in the United States did some work with radiologists, and radiologists are those people who are looking at x-rays and ultrasounds and all the different pictures that get created, and their gift, their pattern of working is to notice what's not part of the pattern. So they would notice maybe a hairline crack here or a displaced rib here. In this particular study, the researchers took out the collarbone right there. They took it completely out of the x-ray and then put it in a package that of other x-rays that the radiologist could look. 60% of the radiologists did not know or notice that the collarbone was gone. That's perceptual blindness, and we experience it even when we don't know we're experiencing it. So to be aware that we're experiencing it should be a reason for us to expand our perception. The same study, they took a matchbook-sized picture of a man in a gorilla suit with shaking his fist, and they planted it into a lung x-ray in 4 places. 83% of the radiologists did not see the little man in a gorilla suit. 83%. So that's a little scary for radiologists reading my x-ray. I'm not sure about yours. But that's perceptual blindness again in action. So we need to be aware of it. So when we talk about what creates our filters, there are many things that create our filters from the time we're born to today. We can look at our morals and our beliefs and our values. We can look at our culture, how it impacts on us. We can look at our environment and how the experiences we have in the environment, our general experiences in life overall. There's also a genetic code to it, part of it. Our education impacts on our filters. So if you see all of the different possibilities, millions of possibilities inside of each one of those, and this isn't an exhaustive list, you can see how our perception is so unique, like a fingerprint, just to us. Is there anything I might have missed on the list?
Your upbringing, like biology, and your genetic, and also your culture, like you have culture. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so we have to be aware of these filters impacting on us, but we have to, more than that, be realizing that there's other filters affecting the person next to us in a different way. I'll give you a moment for this quote. And I'm sure everyone here on the webinar has experienced talking to someone who just doesn't get what you're thinking, or the reverse. You just don't get what they're talking about or what they're thinking. So perception is a very valuable tool in allowing us to communicate and understand where other people are. First and foremost is the awareness. We see things differently, even though we're looking at the same thing. So for me, the most important part of all of this is the gap. When I call it the gap, I refer to the gap. And in our body, we have nerve synapses that are gaps between the different neurons that release electrical stimuli or chemical stimuli to get us to a point. And this is how messages travel by through all the different nerves in our bodies, millions of these, by tiny little gaps. But more importantly, we have what I look at in the mind is something that's stimulus. And then when we have a stimulus, we have a response to it. This happens to us 24/7. But in that between the stimulus and the response in our minds, between the emotional mind, it's the first thing on the scene, and then a half a second later, the rational mind comes skidding up saying, okay, what can I do? What can I do? This is the gap. And it's the only place that we have the freedom to choose how we respond. We have no control over the stimulus generally. The stimulus comes from wherever it comes in our environment. Sometimes we can choose to stimulate ourselves to say, okay, let's go bake a birthday cake and we'll celebrate it with the kids tonight. So the stimulus is there, the gap is quick, The response is, let's bake the cake and have fun. This is the most powerful part of the human brain, right here. We can choose right here how we're going to react if we are aware of it. So the gap is really, for me, the most powerful part. And I think through my research and studies, this is where stress begins, and it's absolutely where it ends, because I can control how I react. And I can do that by taking a pause before some stimuli to say, oh, I need to think about this for a minute or a second or a day before we react. Quite often, the emotional brain comes flying in and says, this is how you've reacted before. This is how it's going to go. Yay, we're done. And we look back and say, oh, I wished I hadn't said that. So the gap to me is the most important part. The process, the tool that is used is the pain-pleasure continuum. Every decision we make is made based on some degree of pain or some degree of pleasure. And I've challenged clients in many webinars, or even generally when I'm working with them individually, give me a decision that you've made that didn't involve some level of pain or pleasure. And this is always on. This is how we survived for 2 million years. This is how most animals have survived. Maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain. In the gap, this is where we have the control. We can dial back the pain and say, no, I want to feel this way, and we can dial up the pleasure. Here's the gap in action. And when it comes to positive stress or negative stress, in the gap, if I continually react in negative ways or critical ways or ways that aren't helping me, I can spiral down into the backside of that curve very quickly. And then I have a negative view of the world. I have the choice, the freedom to choice to, in the gap, sorry, go back, come on, go back. In the gap, choose to react to it positively. So a negative situation comes to me, I can say, okay, I can't control this. How can I approach it more positively, or how can I learn more about it? That can spiral us up into a positive place to be. Quick second to read this. It's a famous quote. Probably many of you have read it. Yes, awesome. That's why all of our children are different, even though we think they're the same some days. So here's 5 actions. I'm running right at the 40 mark, but I'm going to run through 5 actions that you can actually take for making stress your ally. The first one is understand the negativity bias. The negativity bias is the biggest bias by far in our brain, and it's the one that's kept us safest for millions of years. And it's our tendency to notice and react and learn from the negative things in our environment so that we can stay safe and secure. Today, the negativity bias is still with us. And if you look at the media, they play on the negativity bias. We quickly notice the negative things, we react to them, and in a continual, we're surrounded a lot of times with just the negativity of our world, the sensationalism. But here's a number for you to remember, and it comes from research. It takes 5 positive interactions to overcome 1 negative reaction. So remember that, 5 to 1. 5 negative to overcome a positive. Sorry, 5 positive to overcome a negative. And here's another little piece of information about that. 1 positive interaction will ripple out to about 4 to 5 people in our connection, in our network. 1 negative piece of information will ripple out into our network 6 to 7 degrees out. So we can see the power. So understand that the negativity bias is there. The second one is manage the gap, much like we talked. Remember it's there. Take a pause. play whack-a-mole. So I'm sure that we all have had a chance of laying awake at night, playing the whack-a-mole game or ruminating on thoughts. They go round and round and round. And every time it pops up, we whack it down and it comes up someplace else. The trick is to focus on the right things. So when I play whack-a-mole, I stop it and I think for a minute of something that's happening or something that's positive in my life to shut down that game. So quite often it'll be around horses or it'll be my grandkids. The whack-a-mole may start again, but each time that I do that, I extend the period of whack-a-mole being put off in the distance and helping my brain say, there's another way to think about this. Be aware of the positive stress already in your life. I mean, this is something when we're overwhelmed and we're frustrated, we just don't see. And it's so present around us. Our grandkids, our kids, the things that people are doing well, a new job that you started, a new task or a new project that you started. These are all positive things. And I challenge you to take some time, open up a book and just write down some of the positive things that are in your life. And that leads us right into the last one, which is the gratitude option. Use gratitude often. One of the things that my wife Brenda and I have done is we have a book that sits on the kitchen table, and it's a gratitude book. We write in there at least one thing per day, or maybe even two, that we're grateful for. But we take it another level. Underneath of what we're grateful for, we say, why am I grateful for it? And the book's open. It just lays there. So when the grandkids come over or our kids come over or somebody's visiting and they see it, they may write something in it as well. And so there's a lot of science, a lot of research behind gratitude and its ability to help you think positively. So I'll leave you with this. Awareness is always the starting point. If we're not aware of something, we don't know there's a problem. If we don't expand our perception, we'll only be aware of what's in our comfort zone. We need to increase our awareness by increasing our perception. And it's not easy. And I think that's it. You've got the questions. There's my email address again, if you'd like to email them to me, and I'm going to stop the share. And I also have a couple of chats here to look at. I think negative minds often live in fear. I choose to live in hope, gratefulness, and love in life. Live. Awesome. Yes. And you are making the choice. The key word is you're making the choice. And that's awesome, Anka. That's awesome.
I just think, so Dana, thank you so much for this. And I'm sorry, I'm not really well. I haven't been well for a while.
Oh, no.
Yeah, no, I got sick a few weeks back and I can't get rid of it. I wanted to say that, like, I did my undergrad in psychology, was my minor. And I think when you learn about society and genetics and being aware of self, I also speak about a lot about mindfulness. And being aware comes with the knowledge of self, not only self in the world, but self around the people that have different personalities. And so I think for myself, I'm grateful for having learned that at a very young age. And so when you live with that, I think it's like a disassociation of who you are and what your place is on the planet and your legacy and where you want to be and how you want to pay it forward. So it goes a lot with awareness. Also becomes of what humanity is and how we see the world and what we do for other people and acts of kindness and service and all those, you spoke about gratitude. I wake up every day and speak it and write. I've had a journal since I was 12 years of age.
Wow.
And yeah, because I think, when I'm raising my son the same way, where I have had a journal, he's had a journal since he was 3. And I tell him, I'm like, what is something you failed at today? What is something you did great today? So that he is aware of his actions upon the people that surround him. Not just, you don't just make a choice, because I also feel that every choice you make has a ripple effect in everybody in your life, right?
Absolutely.
So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And thank you for sharing. That's awesome that you've got your son started that young. That's great. That's huge. I know that when I work with clients at the adult level, a lot of the response to anxiety and stress, as we've said, has been learned, and it's become solid, and it's become a habit that now is 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, and they're very strong and they're very reactive. So the ability to change that habit into a positive reaction will happen over time, but we need to do it in tiny pieces with rewards, almost like a Hansel and Gretel trail. Oh, I'm feeling good, I did this. I'm feeling good, I did this. And eventually that habit will override the other one. The strength of the old habit is tough to push out, but I always tell people it absolutely can be done. The neuroplasticity, it can be done. So thank you for sharing that part of it. That's awesome.
I was gonna say too, do you feel, Dana, do you
Dana,
feel
yeah.
that it's also cultural? Like, I'm not from Canada. I was born in Europe, and I think your culture, like I have friends from all over the world, like from Asia and India and, you know, you're Latin America. Like, I think also the stress is also cultural. Like, I think it's very much your resilience as where you were born, how you were raised, all those things that come up with how do you see stress? How is stress, have you been raised to see stress as a negative?
Mhm.
I think also coming from, because no matter what, I've been here for years, but I still see myself as an immigrant woman, that North America places this pressure, especially on the younger generation of, I want it now, I want it like a very, the stress is being brought on at a very young age, not, it's not a positive, it's not a positive way of, of, what am I trying to say? Like, it's not a positive way of how they raise, how children are being raised and how they feel about stress. So do you, what are your thoughts on the culture part of other cultures all around the globe?
Can't speak too much to the other cultures. I know some cultures, I know some people from some cultures who seem to have when they come here, they have a very positive giving attitude. I just recently read a research article on the negativity bias and its impact on our children in North America in general. And it's largely due to the things that you mentioned, Anka, was about, I want it now. I want what the other guy has. I want that immediate satisfaction. And so that constant immediate reward builds. If it's a reward system, it's going to build, and we may not want it, but it's going to build. And I'll give you a personal example. I have 3 grandkids that are in Parksville, and they are pretty much spend a lot of time on their devices. And I have grandkids here in Lethbridge and in Calgary that spend very little time on their devices. And when they do get it, it's a privilege to get it. And the rest of the time it's play. So it's not only different cultures, it's the changing culture that we live in.
Dana, I was just going to comment. Some great slides there, actually, good visuals. Trying to absorb lots of information with some simple graphics has been great. And because I'm reading a book on unconscious bias, and and you know what, I think it resonates because there's a lot of really good information in the book, but some of your slides just complement it, and it's really, this was more stress related, but some of the same principles completely apply to unconscious bias that people have without even knowing, right? So I think awareness, just another piece of awareness has really helped. So thanks.
Yeah, who's the author, Ron?
Dolly Chugg. It's
okay.
It's called the person you mean to be, and it is really focused on unconscious bias, either racial or just religion, all the things that plague society today, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think obviously some of the principles are the same behind it.
Oh, awesome. I'll look that book up. Thank you. That's good. Any other questions or comments?
Sorry, Ron, who is that book by?
It's by Dolly Chugg, Chuggh, and it's called The Person You Mean to Be.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's great.
All right.
She needs some of your slides, though. It's all words. I'm a visual person, so your slides were great.
Yeah, I tend to be too. There we go on the chat. Just seeing who's there. A lot of this I learned just by performance coaching and mentoring with leaders and managers and supervisors. But it occurred to me last year when my business was changing and making a transition from being in person with people to learning all of this stuff, that most of what I've learned can be applied to stress. And then I thought, well, then why can't we look at stress in a positive way? So it's been a rewarding journey for me, to say the least. So, and fun. Good.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was a great presentation, and I think everyone got quite a bit out of it.
Thank you very much.
We're
It was
really
fun,
happy
and
to
thanks for the
host you.
questions.
Thanks, Dana.
Okay.
We're so happy we could host you today.
Yeah.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
rest of your day.